This meme coin rally started around February 28th, and it almost came out of nowhere. I mean, a lot of people have predicting it, but I think the timing is quite interesting. And I think the timing coincides actually with some political developments in Korea. And Korea is very well known for the meme coin trading.
For more on the market's action, let's bring in founder of 10x Research, Markus Thielen, who has been on the show before, and he's been very accurate with his predictions. Markus, welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Now, I have to bring it up, Markus. Every time you're on this show, you give us some predictions that sometimes they're very hard to fathom, and most of the time they come true. So I'm very excited to have you here this morning. You heard me read the prices there. What are you watching this morning?
Well, we're definitely watching, ETF flows. We have been watching, end of last week, how the market has reacted towards those flows. And, for the last kind of like 8-9 days, we have the suspicion that the flows might actually run out a little bit. And I think that would be, of course, a little, headwind really for the markets. And so I think we saw already, the first, kind of like taste after the US market closed on Thursday, really, when the Fidelity number came out, and the Fidelity number was very low. It was from, more than 200 million, the previous days to just, I think, like 13 million. And then, of course, on Saturday, or, Saturday Asia time, Friday night US time, when basically the BlackRock number came out, that was also very weak. So I think that's why we had the sell-off over the weekend. Of course, sentiment came back a little bit, because also when you look at how the flows actually are distributed during the week, we're seeing very strong inflows on Monday and Tuesday, but basically Thursday and Friday is usually only half. So really today is a big testing level really for the market. If the flows are going to be strong, the rally can continue. If not, I think the market is on a fragile footing here.
Were you surprised to see that drawback in flows? If you read the headlines, one could derive that a lot of folks thought that we were going to see flows come and come and come, and they were never going to stop because advisor platforms are eventually going to offer access to the ETFs. RIAs are eventually going to offer access to the ETFs. But now we're seeing this drawback. Were you surprised to see that so suddenly?
Well, I think eventually the flows have to kind of like calm down a little bit, right? We had like really super strong inflows. Even last week on Tuesday, we were more like a billion US dollars. But what's interesting is, of course, that the grayscale GBTC flows have actually also quite down a little bit. So it's actually a really easy hurdle to beat. And at the same time, the net inflows have really also, come down. But I think what's also interesting is that, we have noticed actually for the last 2-3 weeks that Bitcoin actually, the prices have not gone up during US trading hours. So what has actually happened is really during the last kind of like 3-4 hours before the US markets open. So before the ETF actually opened, somebody was buying, Bitcoin, and the price actually tended to rally during those 3 to 4 hours before the US market opened. And then, of course, despite the strong buying we had through these ETFs, the price actually didn't go up. And I think what's interesting is really on Thursday, we also didn't have this for the first time in a long time, that Bitcoin didn't go up during European hours. And of course, then, the buffer was a little gone. And I think that's why we had like the pressure. So I think that's quite interesting. And again, today, I think we seem to be struggling a little bit as well. So maybe this, mystery buyer that tends to front run the flows is not there anymore.
What do you derive from that? Bitcoin's being bought up in European trading hours. What do you make of that? What does that tell you?
It tells us that, somebody had some, call it inside knowledge, or somebody was really just like, front running the flows until the flows really stop. And I think we were a little bit suspicious that this kind of like tended to stop last week, but somebody was very confident every time. And this was like a nice alpha trade where you just buy it, 6 a.m. Eastern time, and then you kind of like sell it at basically at noon Eastern time. And I think that's kind of like the trading rhythm we have seen, but this rhythm, stopped. And I think there's a lot of insights to be taken from this, because maybe somebody, kind of was predicting where the flows are coming because they had some, deeper insights about the market.
Markus, you mentioned the potential for a fragile market ahead. What do you mean by that? Give us a prediction. You've always been spot on, so I'm curious to hear where you think this market is heading.
Yeah, of course, we wish that the market goes higher, of course, but I think if the flows run out, I think we have a little bit of an air pocket where we could see the market going down, probably just under like 60K. We don't think it's going to go much lower, because there are no people really willing to really sell en masse. But I think what we had is, of course, a huge increase in futures open interest. Even the funding rate has come in a little bit from like 80 to around like 30, but it's still kind of elevated. So we could still see more liquidations. But of course, you cannot put everything on the shoulders of these ETF buyers. So somebody else has to buy the market. But of course, everybody is already very long. So if we see more kind of like I guess, kind of like a weak sentiment towards those flows, I think then the market can go down because, what we're seeing, of course, is that this another driver of this market, which is Ethereum, the catalyst is out of the way with last week's upgrade, basically.
Okay, so draw back to just under 60K. What do you think happens after that? Maybe give me a price prediction for Bitcoin and Ether by the end of the year.
Oh, it's difficult, but I think Bitcoin can still rally to 83K, if not really take out the the 100K, so 102K. I think that's where we can go. But we would also expect that Ethereum is going to underperform. I think the big risk is that the Ethereum ETF might not happen. I think we have heard nothing so far from like a two-way conversation between the SEC and the issuers. This is very different than when we had the Bitcoin ETF, where there was, of course, a lively discussion back and forth. There were refiling of the S1s, but so far we haven't heard anything, and we are sort of like 2 months away until I think May 23rd is when the so-called approval of these ETFs should happen. And of course, the SEC can argue already against it because it's not so clear if Bitcoin is really the same as Ethereum. So if Ethereum is also a commodity, and I think that's a little bit the worry in the market, and I think that could also be like a like a risk factor.
Markus, I want to turn now to meme coins because I opened my eyes this morning and Solana was up above $200. Meme coins, specifically in the Solana network, have been rallying in recent days. What do you make of this? Why all the attention on the Solana network, and where do you think this is all heading?
Yeah, I think, of course, Solana has, of course, a big treasury that they can, finance a lot of the, the marketing around it. But of course, we're seeing a lot of activity in decentralized exchanges where really the volume has really been exploding. But I think the interesting aspect is really that this meme coin rally started around, February 28th, and it almost came out of nowhere. I mean, a lot of people have predicting it, but I think the timing is quite interesting. And I think the timing coincides actually with some political developments in Korea, and Korea is very well known for the meme coin trading. And as an example, Shiba traded for 7 consecutive days as the number one token on Upbit, and Upbit is a Korea-focused exchange with 80% market share in the country there. And Shiba traded at one point $3.5 billion US. So over this 7-day period, it traded more than 10-11 billion dollars. And I think when you look at breakdown kind of like the flows or the performance of all these various tokens from BTC really to the meme coins, you're seeing that a lot of the meme coins are actually 80% of the performance occurs during Asia hours, and Asia hours is really driven by Korean traders. So we think there is something very closely correlated to the political developments, and Korea has elections on April 10th, where initially the leading party, the ruling party, which is also leading in the polls, initially indicated in early February that they would also approve Bitcoin, a spot ETF. But then on February 28th, they kind of stepped away from this, and it was no longer priority, and it was basically the status quo. And I think that's when basically people started to buy these meme coins because it was basically the green light. And I think that's really kind of an interesting development, but it really seems to be driven more during Asia hours. Because there's this large retail component, and just as another example, I mean, trading volumes in Korea were just kind of like $2 to $3 billion before February 28th, but at one point 2 weeks ago they went all the way to 16 billion. So this was an 8x just in volume, and these days we are still around $8-9 billion, which is equivalent to the whole stock market, which trades at $8 to $9 billion a day. So I think that's an interesting development, and because of the green light from basically the status quo on the policy side, it was really all in meme coin land now.
You mentioned the political landscape in Korea, elections coming up next month. What do you think happens to meme coins after the election? Do they start to lose steam?
They might lose a little bit steam. I think we have seen this already, that volumes have peaked, volumes have exploded, and struggling a little bit with support levels. It's very difficult, to pump in more and more money. But I think, in the end, I think what we still have the Bitcoin story going to continue for the rest of the year, because it's also, more like a macro asset. But some of the other catalysts are slowly kind of like falling away. As I said, the Ethereum, upgrade catalyst is out of the way. Then I think the ETF seems to be less likely, and I think the meme coin, those stories come and go, as we have seen, a few months ago with the ordinals. Just in December, that's when we had, of course, a lot of the crypto stocks, the mining stocks, really exploding because of this. So I think this will be still a year of themes come and go, and we just have to see what's going to be the next theme.
One of the big themes is Microstrategy, who keeps buying up Bitcoin. Now, you've been watching Microstrategy very closely as investors use this as a Bitcoin proxy. Talk to me a little bit about your analysis between Microstrategy and Bitcoin's regression.
Of course, this is really, a crazy development, because Microstrategy tended to trade almost like as a discount to their Bitcoin holdings, because investors were evaluating the rest of the business as almost as a negative part. But of course, things have become very different over the last 2 weeks. So we're based on the Bitcoins that the company is holding. Basically, the net asset value is twice as much, and the value of the stock price is twice as much as the value of the net asset value. And when you run a regression analysis, Bitcoin versus MicroStrategy, it still indicates that the shares are 60 to 70% overvalued. And of course, it can gap a lot. The company does not have so much leverage that it's really warranted to this cycle. Some people, of course, arguing that the company is basically shorting cash, shorting bonds, and with that, using those proceeds to really buy Bitcoin and really tries to lever up. But at the end of the day, it seems to be more that 401ks can probably buy already MicroStrategy, because it is a stock. There's also, of course, the possibility that MicroStrategy might be part of the S&P 500, because you need to have a market cap of around $15.8 billion. And MicroStrategy is close to 30 billion or around 30 billion. So it would easily satisfy this. And the review is going to be in June, where the company could actually qualify for it. But it also seems that international investors that don't have access to a Bitcoin spot ETF, that they can buy stocks in the US, and those investors seem to be the ones who are really bidding up the price, because it just goes up. But nevertheless, the company or the shares are really massively overvalued. So we would actually, advise people to really take profit here and rather put the money in Bitcoin ETF. So this is very similar to buying GBTC 18 months ago at a massive discount.
As more folks get access to the ETF, what do you think happens to MicroStrategy shares?
Eventually the shares should really, trade more or less at par, if not at a discount, because historically, what we're seeing, for example, for the gold market, a lot of the gold mining companies, they tend to trade at a discount, because usually management does something, interesting that sort of is less favorable for the shareholders. But of course, here, I think MicroStrategy has played it, perfectly, and really topped it up, because what we have seen last year, every time the shares were trading 20% above fair value, the company came out and issued more shares and used those proceeds to buy Bitcoin. So there was, of course, some irrationality by these shareholders, buying these shares at inflated levels. But of course, what MicroStrategy has done now, when the price went again 20% above it, they actually start to issue, convertible notes. They're kicking in a lot higher. So they're even trying to sell shares not at 20% premium. They're trying to sell shares at 60, 70, 100% premium. And I think that's quite an interesting financial experience, finesse here. I think they're doing this really well. But in the end, I think a lot of the shareholders might not make the returns that they're hoping for, and they might be better off, buying Bitcoin at these levels.
All right, Markus, thanks so much for joining today's show.